Chloe Hale was only 17 when her life was stolen not by a stranger, but by the woman who vowed to protect her. Victoria Hale's affair was a secret worth killing for, and the lengths she went to hide it would shock an entire community. Richard Hale had always been seen as a man who carried himself with quiet dignity, a father who tried his best after the devastating loss of his first wife. He poured his energy into raising his teenage daughter, Chloe, who had grown into a bright, observant young woman. Their bond was strong, built on shared grief and mutual trust. When Richard eventually remarried, friends and neighbors congratulated him, believing he deserved happiness after so many years of sorrow. His new wife, Victoria, entered his life like a fresh start, bringing charm, warmth, and a determination to blend seamlessly into the family. Outwardly, it seemed like Richard had been given a second chance at love and stability, but beneath that surface, subtle tensions were already forming. Chloe was polite to Victoria, but never entirely comfortable in her presence. There was something about her stepmother that felt off. A coldness behind her carefully rehearsed smiles. Whenever Richard was home, Victoria presented herself as loving and attentive, always cooking meals, planning outings, and making gestures of affection. But when Richard was away at work, Chloe often experienced an entirely different side of her stepmother. The warmth disappeared, replaced by short tempers, dismissive comments, and an air of resentment that Chloe couldn't quite explain. At first, Chloe convinced herself that maybe she was imagining it, that perhaps adjusting to a blended family simply took time. Richard, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. He threw himself into his career, determined to provide financial security and a stable environment for his daughter and new wife. He worked long hours, which meant Victoria often had the house to herself. In those hours of solitude, Victoria's true nature began to emerge. She enjoyed the freedom, the secrecy, the sense that no one was watching. She was a woman who craved attention and excitement, and the quiet suburban life with Richard did not satisfy her. To those on the outside, the Hale family was perfect. But Victoria's hidden desires were already pulling her in dangerous directions. Chloe, intelligent and observant, noticed small details others might overlook. She noticed the way Victoria's phone seemed to light up constantly when Richard was on home, how she would step outside to take certain calls, lowering her voice so no one could hear. She noticed the expensive perfume that lingered in the air even when Victoria claimed she had been home all day. Chloe kept these suspicions to herself at first, though they left her uneasy. She worried that telling her father would only cause stress. And she hated the idea of disrupting the fragile happiness he seemed to have found. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that her stepmother was hiding something important. The cracks in their family life widened in small but noticeable ways. Victoria often dismissed Chloe's achievements at school or made subtle digs that chipped away at her confidence. To Richard, she framed these moments as harmless teasing or motherly advice, but Chloe felt the sting behind them. Over time, a quiet resentment began to build between stepmother and stepdaughter. Richard, caught up in the demands of his job, never recognized how tense the household truly was when he wasn't there. What no one realized was that these small suspicions and simmering conflicts were only the beginning. Victoria's carefully hidden secret life would soon erupt into a storm of betrayal and violence that none of them could have imagined, and Chloe's instincts about her stepmother would prove tragically accurate. Victoria Hale's double life began quietly, in ways that seemed harmless at first glance. She had grown bored with the predictability of her marriage and found herself craving excitement and attention from outside her home. That attention came in the form of Ethan Ward, a man she met through a local fitness club. He was younger, charming, and reckless enough to match the dangerous thrill she sought. Their flirtations quickly escalated into a full-fledged affair, carried out in secrecy while Richard worked long hours and Chloe attended school. For Victoria, the relationship offered passion and validation she felt was missing at home. For Ethan, it was the thrill of being with someone forbidden, though he never fully understood the risks involved. Victoria became skilled at hiding her affair, perfecting the art of deception. She erased call logs, deleted messages, and crafted believable excuses for her time away from the house. Yet Chloe's sharp eyes began catching details others would ignore. She noticed her stepmother's unexplained absences, the way her clothes were slightly rumpled at times, and the unfamiliar cologne that lingered faintly in the car. Chloe kept these observations to herself, but they created an unease that gnawed at her daily. Victoria, however, underestimated Chloe. She assumed the girl was too young, too distracted with her own life to notice anything. That assumption allowed her to grow bolder. She invited Ethan to the house when Richard worked late, confident Chloe wouldn't return until evening. But one afternoon, Chloe came home early from school, and what she saw confirmed her worst fears. Through a partially closed door, she caught sight of Victoria and Ethan together. Shocked and devastated, Chloe quietly backed away, her heart racing with confusion and betrayal. The discovery left Chloe shaken. She loved her father deeply and could not imagine breaking his heart with the truth. But the weight of the secret was unbearable. She confided only in her best friend, Lily Carter, who urged her to tell Richard. Chloe hesitated, torn between loyalty to her father and fear of Victoria's wrath if she found out. Victoria, meanwhile, sensed a change in Chloe's demeanor. She noticed the girl watching her more closely. Her guarded expressions, the tension in her voice. Victoria began to suspect that Chloe knew more than she should, and paranoia slowly crept in. Ethan, oblivious to the danger, encouraged Victoria to run away with him, imagining a life free from the burden of secrecy. But Victoria was not willing to give up her comfortable life with Rich at the house. The stability, the financial security, she wanted both worlds. The respectable life of a wife and the illicit thrill of an affair. Chloe's knowledge of a secret threatened to destroy that balance. In her mind, the girl had become a dangerous liability. The atmosphere in the Hale household grew heavy, though Richard remained blind to the He saw only what Victoria wanted him to see. A functioning family, a loving wife, and a dutiful daughter. But beneath that fragile facade, tensions had begun to spiral out of control. Victoria's fear of exposure planted seeds of desperation. And Chloe's quiet determination to protect her father placed her in far greater danger than she realized. Chloe struggled with the knowledge she carried, the secret about her stepmother's betrayal weighing heavily on her young shoulders. Every day she returned home. She felt the walls of the house closing in around her, trapping her in a web of deceit she had never asked to be part of. She avoided Victoria as much as possible, but avoidance only raised more suspicion. Victoria noticed the distance and recognized it as a silent threat. Each time Chloe's eyes lingered too long, each time she hesitated before answering, Victoria became more certain that Chloe was preparing to expose her. Victoria's paranoia began to consume her. She lay awake at night, imagining scenarios where Richard discovered everything. She pictured her marriage collapsing, her reputation destroyed, and Ethan eventually losing interest in her when her security and status vanished. To her, Chloe was the key to it all, the single thread that could unravel the careful image she had built. Instead of trying to mend the relationship with her stepdaughter, Victoria's thoughts darkened. She began to see Chloe not as family, but as an enemy. Ethan was no help in calming her fears. He encouraged reckless solutions, dismissing the danger as something they could handle together. He told her Chloe was just a child, that her words could easily be twisted or discredited if she ever spoke up. But Victoria knew Chloe had proof. The girl had seen them together, and her silence was far more threatening than open confrontation. Silence meant plotting, planning, waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. That kind of uncertainty gnawed at Victoria's composure, leaving her volatile and unstable. Chloe, meanwhile, debated endlessly about what to do. She thought of confiding in her father, but stopped herself every time she saw the love in his eyes for Victoria. She feared that revealing the truth would shatter him completely. Instead, she clung to Lily Carter for comfort, spending more time at her friend's house, desperate for a safe space away from home. But even Lily could sense how close to breaking Chloe was. She urged her to take action before things spiraled further, but Chloe remained paralyzed, trapped between fear and love. The tension reached a breaking point one evening when Chloe accidentally left her school bag near the kitchen table. Victoria, rifling through it under the pretense of tidying up, found a folded note Chloe had written but never sent. It was a letter to her father, detailing everything she had seen. Though unfinished, it was enough to confirm Victoria's worst fear. Chloe had been preparing to expose her. Panic coursed through Victoria as she stared at the paper, her hands trembling. The decision she had been avoiding suddenly felt unavoidable. Victoria convinced herself that Chloe's silence was no longer an act of mercy, but a strategy. In her twisted logic, Chloe had become a threat not only to her marriage, but to her very survival. The affair could destroy everything if revealed. And Victoria told herself she had no choice but to protect what was hers. It was not love for Ethan or fear of losing him that fueled her, but the terror of losing her status, her security, and her carefully cultivated image. From that moment on, Victoria's mind settled on a dark path. She began to watch Chloe more closely, noting her routines, her vulnerabilities, the times she was alone. To outsiders, nothing seemed amiss. Richard remained blissfully unaware, convinced his family life was intact. But under the roof of the Hale home, a deadly plan had already begun to take shape, with Chloe caught helplessly at the center. The days that followed were suffocating for Chloe. She sensed an unspoken hostility in the house, a tension that made her stomach tighten each time she crossed paths with Victoria. The once polite exchanges between them turned into cold, silent stares. Chloe told herself she was imagining things, but the unease never left her. Richard remained oblivious, absorbed in his work and trusting his wife to maintain harmony at home. To him, nothing seemed out of place, but to Chloe, every moment felt like stepping closer to danger. Victoria's demeanor toward Chloe shifted in subtle but frightening ways. She began questioning Chloe's whereabouts, her friendships, and even her school assignments with an intensity that felt more like interrogation than concern. She made offhand remarks about trust and betrayal, comments that seemed casual on the surface, but carried an edge sharp enough for Chloe to recognize the hidden meaning. Chloe confided in Lily, admitting she felt watched, but even Lily struggled to understand the depth of Victoria's menace. To others, Victoria was charming, gracious, and attentive. Only, Chloe knew, the darker truth lurking behind the mask. At night, Chloe found herself lying awake, unable to shake the sense that something terrible was looming. Her letter, which had gone missing, haunted her thoughts. She didn't know if her father had discovered it or if Victoria had. The possibility of the latter filled her with dread, but she had no proof. She considered writing another letter, hiding it somewhere safer. But fear paralyzed her into inaction. Each day she delayed felt like a gamble with her life. Meanwhile, Victoria's paranoia deepened. The discovery of the letter had pushed her into a mental spiral, where every action Chloe took seemed calculated to ruin her. She saw Chloe's silence as a weapon, a form of control that threatened to dismantle everything she had built. Her conversations with Ethan grew darker as she vented her frustrations. Ethan dismissed her fears at first, but Victoria's intensity began to worry him. He didn't share her desperation to eliminate Chloe, but he lacked the courage to oppose her. His silence became its own kind of complicity. Victoria started planning in ways that made her feel powerful again. She rehearsed explanations in her head, creating narratives to deflect suspicion should anything happen. She imagined Richard grieving and clinging to her for support, never realizing she had orchestrated his suffering. These twisted fantasies soothed her panic, convincing her that the end justified the means. The idea of removing Chloe no longer felt unthinkable. It felt necessary. One evening, Victoria suggested a family trip to a nearby lake. Richard welcomed the idea, eager for quality time with his wife and daughter. Chloe, however, felt a shiver of unease the moment the suggestion was made. Something about the way Victoria's eyes lingered on her made her heart pound. She wanted to refuse, but couldn't find a reason that wouldn't raise suspicion. The plan was set, and Chloe reluctantly agreed, though every instinct told her it was a mistake. As the weekend approached, Chloe tried to prepare herself. She tucked away small notes in her school books and left messages hidden in her belongings, desperate in case something happened to her. She clung to Lily more than ever, but she kept her darkest fears unspoken, not wanting to burden her friend with thoughts she herself could barely comprehend. The night before the trip, Chloe dreamed of water pulling her under, cold and suffocating. She woke with tears on her face, a sense of doom clinging to her like a shadow. Across the hall, Victoria lay awake too, not with fear, but with determination. In her mind, the problem had a solution, and that solution was only a day away. The morning of the trip began with forced smiles and rehearsed warmth. Richard packed the car with snacks, blankets, and fishing gear, humming to himself, oblivious to the undercurrents running beneath the surface. Chloe moved slowly, dragging her feet as she placed her bag in the trunk. Her guts screamed at her to back out, to make up an excuse and stay behind. but she couldn't bring herself to defy her father's enthusiasm. He looked so happy, so unaware, and Chloe didn't want to disappoint him. Victoria, on the other hand, appeared radiant, dressed neatly with her hair pinned back, her charm turned up to its fullest. She offered Richard small touches of affection, leaning on his shoulder, laughing softly at his jokes. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect wife, eager for family bonding. But behind her smile lay a carefully calculated plan. She had been waiting for this day, rehearsing every detail in her mind. The isolation of the lake, the deep waters, the lack of witnesses, it all played into her design. The drive to the lake was filled with casual conversation. Richard asked Chloe about school, about her upcoming exams, and she responded politely, but her voice trembled every so often. She couldn't shake the image from a dream the night before, the cold water wrapping around her like chains. She glanced at Victoria through the rearview mirror, and the look she caught in her stepmother's eyes confirmed her worst fears. For just a second, the mask slipped, and Chloe saw not affection, but calculation. When they arrived, the lake was still and serene, its surface like glass. Tall trees lined the edges, casting shadows that rippled across the water. Richard busied himself unloading the car, excited about setting up the fishing rods. Chloe lingered near the shoreline, her arms wrapped around herself as though the air had suddenly chilled. Victoria walked up beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, but it felt heavy with intent. Richard insisted on renting a small rowboat to take them out onto the water. Chloe wanted to object, to say she wasn't feeling well, but Victoria spoke first, encouraging the idea. She insisted it would be fun, a memory they would treasure. With little room for argument, Chloe found herself climbing into the boat with her father and stepmother. Richard rowed with ease, humming as the boat drifted further from the shore. The distance between them and safety growing with every pull of the oars. Chloe's heart pounded as the boat reached the center of the lake. Richard cast his line, focused on the rippling water, while Victoria sat still, her gaze fixed on Chloe with a calm intensity. The silence was heavy, broken only by the gentle splash of water against the boat. Chloe tried to steady her breathing, forcing herself to believe nothing would happen, that her fears were only in her head. But when Victoria shifted slightly, her hand brushing the side of the boat with deliberate care, Chloe knew the danger was real. Richard, absorbed in his fishing, never noticed the tension between the two women. He laughed as he talked about catching dinner, his voice light and carefree. Chloe sat frozen, every nerve in her body on edge, aware that at any moment the calm could shatter. Victoria leaned closer, her smile faint but her eyes burning with purpose. The boat rocked slightly, an ordinary motion to Richard, but to Chloe it felt like the beginning of something irreversible. The lake was quiet, the world around them distant, and she realized with chilling clarity that if something were to happen, no one would hear her scream. The day, which had started like an innocent family outing, was now balanced on a knife's edge. For Chloe, every second was a fight between staying calm and giving in to panic. For Victoria, it was the moment she had been waiting for. And for Richard, it was nothing more than another day at the lake, unaware that his world was about to change forever. The water glistened under the sun, the gentle ripples rocking the small boat. Richard hummed happily, adjusting his fishing line, completely unaware of the tension that pulsed between his wife and daughter. Chloe sat rigid, her fingers clenched against her knees, her eyes darting toward the shore that now felt impossibly far away. Victoria's posture was relaxed, too relaxed, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment. Richard leaned forward, distracted by a tug on his line. The boat shifted slightly with his movements, and Chloe's body stiffened. That was when Victoria made her move. Her hand shot out, pressing firmly against Chloe's shoulder, forcing her toward the edge of the boat. The motion was sudden, smooth, and frighteningly precise, as if she had rehearsed it countless times in her mind. Chloe gasped, her body teetering as the wooden edge dug into her back. The splash was loud, but it didn't register in Richard's ears as danger. He thought Chloe had slipped, and he shouted her name in alarm. Chloe's arms flailed, the icy water swallowing her as she struggled to keep her head above the surface. The shock of the cold stole her breath, and panic clawed at her chest. She kicked furiously, desperate to reach the boat. Victoria leaned over the edge, feigning panic for Richard's sake. She extended a hand, calling out for Chloe to grab it. But every time Chloe's fingers came close, Victoria pulled back just enough, keeping the distance between them. To Richard, it looked like his wife was desperately trying to help, her face etched with false concern. To Chloe, it was clear that this was no accident. This was the moment she had dreaded. Richard dropped his fishing rod and scrambled to reach Chloe, leaning dangerously over the side of the boat. His voice cracked with urgency, shouting at her to hold on. Chloe's arms burned as she fought against the weight of her drenched clothes, her legs thrashing beneath the surface. The water pulled at her, dragging her down, and every second felt like an eternity. Victoria moved with quiet precision, keeping herself between Richard and the truth. She reached out again, this time gripping Chloe's wrist. But instead of pulling her up, her fingers tightened like a vice, pushing her further under the water with deceptive force. Chloe's eyes widened, bubbles streaming from her mouth as she fought to break free. Richard saw none of it, his angle obscured by Victoria's body, his mind clouded by panic. For a terrifying moment, Chloe felt herself slipping beneath the surface, the water filling her nose and mouth. Her lungs screamed for air, and she thrashed violently, finally wrenching her arm free from Victoria's grip. With one last, desperate kick, she broke the surface, gasping for breath. Richard reached out, managing to grab hold of her arm this time. He strained with all his strength, hauling her back into the boat. Chloe collapsed onto the wooden floor, coughing violently, her body trembling with shock. Water pooled around her as she tried to catch her breath. Richard knelt beside her, patting her back, his voice thick with relief. He hugged her tightly, whispering reassurances, completely oblivious to the silent fury in Victoria's eyes. Victoria masked her frustration quickly, putting on an expression of concern. She stroked Chloe's wet hair, pretending to soothe her, while inside she seethed at the failure of her plan. She had been so close, just seconds away from silencing Chloe forever. Now, she had to think fast, to adjust, to bide her time, until the next opportunity presented itself. Chloe, though weak and shivering, knew the truth. Her stepmother hadn't tried to save her, she had tried to drown her. The realization burned inside her. But when she looked at her father, still oblivious, she felt the crushing weight of isolation. She couldn't tell him here. Not like this. For now, she had to stay quiet, to endure, and to survive. Victoria sat back, her smile faint, her eyes fixed on Chloe with a promise unspoken. The attempt had failed, but the plan was not over. The house felt heavier than ever when they returned from the lake, the silence pressing down on everyone, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension. Richard carried the fishing gear inside, humming nervously to distract himself from the frightening memory of nearly losing his daughter. Chloe walked ahead of him, her clothes still damp despite the blanket he had wrapped around her. Every step she took seemed to echo with the thought that she had been seconds away from death. Not by accident, but by design. Victoria followed closely behind, her movements calm, calculated, almost graceful. She carried herself as though nothing unusual had happened, her face soft with feigned concern. She had already woven the story in her mind. Chloe had slipped while reaching for the water, and she had tried her best to save her. To Richard, that explanation would make sense. He loved his wife too much to suspect anything darker. But Chloe knew better. Every time Victoria's eyes caught hers, she saw the silent threat lurking beneath the surface. After dinner, Chloe retreated to her room, locking the door and curling into the corner of her bed. Her mind replayed the moment in the water, the iron grip on her wrist, the deliberate way her stepmother held her down. She pressed her face into her knees, her body trembling with fear. She wanted to tell her father to make him see, but the thought of his disbelief terrified her. He would defend Victoria, dismiss Chloe's words as paranoia or teenage rebellion. The truth would isolate her even more. Meanwhile, in the living room, Victoria sat by the fireplace, her gaze fixed on the flames. The failure of her plan weighed heavily on her pride, but not on her conscience. She had been so close to erasing Chloe from her life, to protecting her secrets forever. Now, she would have to be smarter, more patient. Richard's devotion blinded him, and Chloe's silence was her advantage. Still, she couldn't ignore the flicker of defiance in Chloe's eyes after she was pulled from the water. The girl would not stay quiet forever, and that made her dangerous. Richard joined her, pouring himself a drink. He sighed, running a hand over his face, confessing how terrified he had been when Chloe slipped. Victoria leaned against him, her expression carefully sympathetic. She murmured soothing words, playing the role of the loving wife. Inside, though, she was already plotting the next move. She would not fail again. Upstairs, Chloe wiped her tears and began to think. She could not stay passive. She needed to find proof, something undeniable that would expose Victoria's intentions. But how? Every attempt she imagined felt impossible. Her stepmother always one step ahead. The isolation gnawed at her. But beneath the fear, a spark of determination began to form. If no one would protect her, she would have to protect herself. That night, when the house fell quiet, Chloe stayed awake, her ears straining for every creak of the floorboards. Sleep felt dangerous now. She knew her stepmother's patience was not infinite, and the next attempt might come sooner than she expected. She had survived once by chance, but she would not leave her survival to chance again. Victoria, lying beside Richard in their bedroom, stared into the dark with cold, steady eyes. The failure haunted her, but it also fueled her resolve. Chloe was still a threat, and threats had to be eliminated. Next time, she would make sure there were no mistakes. The house held its breath, balanced on the edge of a secret war between stepmother and stepdaughter. Both were waiting. Both were watching. And both understood that only one of them would prevail. The tension in the house had grown unbearable. Days had passed since the incident at the lake, yet the unease lingered in every corner. Richard moved through his routines with the same oblivious devotion, never questioning the strange silences between his wife and daughter. But beneath the surface, Chloe and Victoria circled one another like predators, each waiting for the other to make a move. Chloe had become more watchful, more careful. She began carrying a small notebook where she wrote down everything she noticed. The way Victoria's tone shifted when Richard wasn't around, the moments she caught her staring too long, the places she disappeared too late at night. Chloe knew evidence would be the only way to save herself. Fear still gripped her, but determination pushed her forward. She was tired of being the helpless target of her stepmother's plans. Victoria, meanwhile, was unraveling beneath her calm exterior. Her patience wore thin as Chloe continued to survive and evade her traps. Each day Chloe lived was another chance for her to speak out, another risk of exposure. The secrecy of her affair weighed on her like chains, the knowledge that Chloe knew the truth making her feel cornered. For Victoria, there was only one solution left: finality. This time, there could be no mistakes, no witnesses, and no second chances. It happened on a stormy evening when Richard was called away for work, leaving the house to the two of them. Chloe felt the danger immediately. The air itself seemed to thicken when the door closed behind her father. She stayed in her room, heart pounding, listening to the wind batter the windows. But she knew hiding forever wasn't an option. If Victoria had chosen this night, then Chloe had to be ready. Victoria moved through the house like a shadow, her footsteps deliberate, her expression serene but cold. In her hand, she carried a kitchen knife, the weight of it steadying her nerves. The storm outside masked the creaks of the old floorboards as she approached Chloe's door. This was the end of the game, but Chloe had anticipated it. She had locked her door hours earlier and placed her phone near the window, recording everything. When Victoria's silhouette appeared under the crack of the door, Chloe's hands trembled, but her resolve held. She called out, loud enough for the microphone to catch, asking why her stepmother hated her so much. She demanded to know why she wanted her gone. Victoria's composure cracked. Believing no one else could hear, she whispered through the door words that betrayed her confessions of resentment, of the affair, and of her failed attempts to end Chloe's life. Chloe waited, then shouted that the police were already on their way. In reality, she had sent the recording to a trusted friend earlier in the evening, begging them to call for help if anything happened. As the words left her mouth, Victoria panicked. For the first time, she felt cornered, her confidence dissolving into rage and fear. She pounded on the door, but the sound of sirens in the distance froze her in place. By the time Richard returned, the house was swarming with police. Chloe sat in the safety of an officer's care, the notebook and recording in her hands. Richard's disbelief shattered as he listened to his wife's own words condemning her. He could only watch as Victoria was led away, her mask of innocence stripped completely. For Chloe, the ordeal was far from over. The scars of betrayal and fear would linger long after the storm passed. But as she stood in the doorway, watching her stepmother disappear into the night, she felt a strength she hadn't known before. She had survived, not by chance, but by courage and cunning. The war between them was finally over, and Chloe had won.